Hello, this is Aram Hamparian speaking to you from our ANCA video studio here in Washington, D.C. during a very busy week, a very productive week here in Washington, D.C., primarily because we have in town visiting a parliamentary delegation from Armenia, a multi-party, five-member delegation that is here to meet with their counterparts in the Armenian caucus, with the executive branch, the White House, the State Department, think tanks, the media, the entire Washington foreign policy community in what is truly a milestone in the growth of U.S. Armenia relations. And we're happy to see the great job the Armenian embassy has done in organizing this visit, but also a part of the political transition of Armenia to a parliamentary democracy. The parliament in Armenia is going to play an increased role in setting the course for that country, and the parliament-to-parliament dialogue is more important than ever, and certainly nowhere more so than here in Washington, D.C. So we're really excited to have this delegation here in town. It's the first, we hope, of many, and it's really a positive development. But it's also a chance for us as Armenian Americans to pause and give some thought to the U.S. Armenia relationship. What is it that we want from this relationship? It's a very fair question. But to know what we want, let's think first about what we've invested, and we have invested a lot. I've written down some notes here. I'd like to share them with you. You can also follow them, my outline, in the comment section underneath this video. Everything I'm going to share with you now is set forth there in kind of skeleton form, but I'll flesh it out in a bit more detail during our talk today. So what is it that we've invested? Well, a century of robust civic participation by Americans of Armenian heritage at every level of the U.S. government. Dating back to the 1890s, Armenians had been in the forum, in the arena, fighting hard for the views and values of our community. That's number one. Number two, we have a quarter century of very constructive partnership and cooperation between Armenia, the Republic of Armenia, and the U.S. government. That's a tremendous asset. There's a lot of goodwill that's been built up over all that the U.S. and Armenia have done together over this past quarter century. And I think at perhaps the deepest level is the enduring bond, the bond of friendship, of faith, of freedom that has brought together the Armenian and American peoples for so very long. That is, I think, the bedrock upon which all this progress rests. And I think each and every one of you who are listening now are part of that fabric, that the weaving together of these two cultures that share so very much in common: a commitment to democracy, a commitment to progress, a commitment to humanity and human rights, certainly genocide prevention. So that's what we've brought to the table. And let's now turn to my initial question. What is it we want? Well, we think about this pretty deeply here in Washington, as you might expect, and certainly hope. And I'll tell you exactly what it is that we'd like to see from this relationship. I'm going to read it just so I don't get any of the words wrong. Building upon all the things I said, the ANCA seeks a healthy, forward-leaning, mutually beneficial U.S. political, economic, military, and security partnership with the U.S. that both strengthens Armenia and provides its citizens and civic leaders with viable strategic options in dealing with regional pressures and development challenges. The anchoring of the United States and Armenia is really a vital issue for Armenia's security and survival. There are other places as well, other anchors of Armenian security and viability that are very important as well. And certainly there are nations in the region that are very important to Armenia's future. Certainly the Europeans play a vital role in Armenia's progress, but so do we here. And it's our job. Our job as Americans of Armenian heritage is to be the stewards of the U.S. part of Armenia's global engagement. So what does that look like? What are the outcomes? What are I think the technical term is, what are the key performance indicators, the KPIs of this relationship? What do we want? Well, I've listed 6 outcomes here in terms of the bilateral relationship. 6 things that we can work toward and hopefully accomplish in the near term. The first is to see an increase in the level of bilateral dialogue and discussion. These discussions, of course, need to be substantive. We're not looking for photo opportunities. They need to be aligned with the key deliverables that matter to the U.S., that matter to the Armenian government. So a higher level of dialogue. I think we can all agree that the past year or so has been a period of transition for the U.S. Armenia relationship, but let's face it, for everybody. There's not a single aspect of Washington, D.C. that has not had to deal with the chaos and uncertainty of a new administration that represents a very new way of thinking about just about everything. And I think even a year plus into the Trump administration, much remains unclear. And for that reason, I think there's a lot of room for growth. There was a lot of room for growth. Under Bush and Obama, progress was made. Continued progress is made, but the environment's been a little shaky. There are very, very serious efforts in Yerevan, at the Armenian Embassy here in Washington, certainly at the State Department and National Security Council, to see that relationship increase in substance and also the symbolism. We want that as well. But the substance of that relationship we see increasing, and we as Americans of Armenian heritage need to be the stewards of that progress. So that's number one, a higher level of engagement across all the sectors, economic, military, political, all the rest. Second, let's focus specifically on the defense relationship. Now, Armenia is in a tough neighborhood, faces some very serious challenges, also has existing relationships with regional powers that are important, but the U.S. Armenia military relationship is very important as well. And the dialogue that takes place between the U.S. and Armenia, the bilateral defense consultation, that needs to increase. We need to see it become more frequent and at higher levels, and see more substance and more cooperation. Two areas in particular that we need to see grow are support for Armenia's peacekeeping operations. Armenia, I believe, is the 5th largest per capita provider of peacekeepers in the world. In the world, small Armenia is the 5th highest per capita provider of peacekeepers, and they're very high quality peacekeepers, some of whom have been injured, others even killed while trying to promote international security. So we'd like to see increased U.S. support for Armenia's peacekeeping abroad. And second, the modernization of the Armenian military, the capacity building side of it, the nuts and bolts, not necessarily the weaponry side, but the nuts and bolts side, the infrastructure side of human resources and reform and civil military relations. There's many areas in which the U.S. experience can help complement the experience and assistance of other countries. So we want to see that bilateral defense consultation increased, and that's number two. Number three is something we've talked about for a long time and we're seeing great progress on, and that's a U.S.-Armenia double tax treaty. Right now, the only thing that governs taxation for companies operating in both jurisdictions is a 1973 outdated accord signed during the Nixon-Brezhnev era. That treaty didn't work in 1973, and it certainly doesn't work in 2018. We need a new treaty, and in that regard, we were very encouraged that Congressman Sherman pressed the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin, during a recent congressional hearing, and that Secretary Mnuchin committed to devoting, I think, exactly 28 hours at a minimum of staff time to exploring this issue. We think he can get the job done in the first 10 hours, because this is a no-brainer. The Treasury Department, the State Department, the White House should be lobbying us for a tax treaty. It's going to be great for the U.S. and U.S. investors. It's going to be great for Armenia, and more importantly, it's going to be great for that relationship. We need this tax treaty. No investor should have to worry about being taxed twice on the same profits. That's simply not fair. So a tax treaty, very high on our agenda. We're making a lot of progress with the Treasury Department, but also seeing an increasing amount of attention from Capitol Hill for this accord. A fourth outcome of improved U.S.-Armenia ties is a Millennium Challenge grant. Now, Armenia has gotten a Millennium Challenge grant in the past. We'd like to see a second grant. We're very excited about the idea of it being a STEM education grant. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. These things are already taught in Armenia school, and in many cases, extremely well. But a grant of $140 or more million investing in STEM education in Armenia's public schools would have a major multiplier, essentially positioning or effectively positioning Armenia as a Silicon Valley of the Caucasus. The potential of Armenia in this field is limitless. With this small investment now, we'll see dividends for decades and decades to come. That's number four. Number five is to build on two particular platforms that have been put in place, one for many years now and one for just a couple of years now. Back in the late 90s, the U.S. government and Armenia established a joint economic task force. They meet typically on an annual basis, and it's a good platform. It provides an opportunity to discuss economic issues and aid issues. That platform we'd like to see utilized even more aggressively and more robustly. Maybe they should not just meet once a year, but perhaps twice a year, once in Yerevan, once in Washington, and maybe they can institutionalize that cooperation in a way that is less periodic and more regular. So that's the Economic Task Force that's been put in place now for close to 20 years. Also, a new accord that the U.S. Trade Representative signed with Armenia in 2015. This is something that we pushed for the better part of a decade prior to its signing, and that's the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, which is specifically devoted to removing obstacles to trade and investment between these two countries. And that deals with taxation, it deals with customs, it deals with the courts. These are some tough issues, and they're tough for the government in Armenia, and they're tough for the government in the U.S., but they have to be hammered out. We got to work through these issues. We're not going to avoid them. We're not going to stick our head in the sand. If there are issues that affect the trade relationship, we need to have this TIFA Council meet frequently and in a very robust and frank exchange of ideas. Let's work these issues out so that American investors feel confident investing in Armenia and vice versa. Armenians should feel good about investing in the U.S. as well. The rules of the road should be the same for everybody. So these are two platforms that already exist, the Economic Task Force and the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, and they can be even better utilized. We give high marks to folks on both sides of the relationship in Yerevan and Washington for all they've done until now, but they can do even more. The last item on the bilateral set of outcomes is direct flights. Now, as it turns out, obviously the homeland of all Armenians is Armenia, but there is a second global center now of the Armenian nation. We've had them in the past, of course, in Beirut and elsewhere, but today Los Angeles represents a global center of Armenian life and the Armenian people, connecting Los Angeles and Yerevan with nonstop flights for both cargo and commercial flights would have a transformative impact. It would reduce the price of imports and exports, and it would facilitate travel. A lot of folks, are not making the trip to Armenia because there's a long stopover somewhere in Moscow or Paris or London or somewhere else, or Dubai, and it becomes very cumbersome. Folks who might be a little bit older or have some trouble getting around really don't need that hassle. So we're looking for and working with airlines and regulators and governments in Yerevan and Washington to see if we can help facilitate, if we can be the catalyst to bring about this nonstop flight. It will be less cost, less hassle, less worry, less time. On every level, this will be a win-win. Once we get it in place, I think it'll prove to be very profitable, and that represents the sixth of our, I think, very realistic, realizable outcomes of improved U.S.-Armenian relations. But it doesn't end there. There are other outcomes as well, and I'll touch on those in just a second. The first set of outcomes deals with Artsakh. As U.S.-Armenia ties continue to improve, I think that we're going to see greater awareness, understanding on the American side of the true dynamics of the Artsakh relationship. That this is not some sterile territorial integrity versus self-determination textbook case of conflict resolution. No, this is actually a very American story of a free people's victory over foreign rule. So we want to see, as U.S.-Armenia relations grow in scope and depth, that the U.S. will engage in a more constructive manner, to resolve Artsakh-Azerbaijan status and security issues based on three key criteria. First is, America's longstanding interest in peace, in security, and regional stability. These are enduring American interests. They're not going to change. But I think that as the relationship develops, there'll be greater clarity among U.S. policymakers about what real peace, what real security, and what real stability is about. Second, this conflict needs to be resolved with U.S. leadership in support of open dialogue among all stakeholders. Right now, for some reason that escapes the logic escapes me, Azerbaijan has been able to enforce a veto on the U.S. government over who we can talk to. Essentially, every U.S. government official, except for maybe 2 or 3, are not even allowed to talk to Artsakh officials. Only the OSCE Minsk Group office, the Minsk Group co-chair, and maybe a handful of aides around him or her are permitted to have a dialogue with the government or even the people of Artsakh. That is the most counterproductive thing, and it goes against every tenet of American diplomacy, which is you sit down and you talk. And you don't talk only to your friends, you talk to your adversaries, and you work these issues out. Because if you can work these issues out in talks, others will not have the opportunity to try to resolve or achieve their aims on the battlefield. Talks are important, dialogue is important. America needs to be the leader in saying, we reject Azerbaijan's gag rule. American officials should be free to travel to Artsakh. They should be free to meet with Artsakh officials here in Washington. Outdated gag rules are essentially tie the hands of our diplomats. Our diplomats want to talk. Our diplomats see that you work things out with dialogue, not with destruction. Yet this outdated, frankly illogical Azerbaijani prohibition prevents the kind of dialogue that we need to resolve the Artsakh issue. So that needs to be part of our future U.S. role in the region, which is promoting dialogue. And third, let's face it, the American position on Artsakh is the American position on Artsakh, which is democracy, 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 self-determination. Is there any foundational precept or principle closer to the American people and the American experience than the idea that free people have the right to govern themselves? That the consent of the governed is the basis of government. That is the foundation of our own Declaration of Independence. That is the foundation of our Constitution. So there is an American position on Artsakh, and that's democracy, democracy, democracy. So that's a second area of outcomes, a better policy on Artsakh. Two more. The first being foreign aid, and the last being the genocide. And after that, I'll wrap up. On foreign aid, we believe that as we see continued engagement and continued progress, and again, high marks to all the parties who are doing a great job. But as we see the fruits of that effort, we like to see four outcomes in terms of U.S. foreign aid policy. The first is increased humanitarian aid to Artsakh. We were very pleased by the Valadao amendment. Congressman David Valadao of Fresno secured the adoption of an amendment to last year's foreign aid bill that continued the Halo Trust demining effort in Artsakh. We want to see that continue, but it also be expanded to include rehabilitation services like those provided by the Lady Cox Rehabilitation Center, which is like angels of mercy in the middle of Stepanakert, helping kids, adults, the elderly with all sorts of mental and physical disabilities. They're doing great work, but they need U.S. help, and we hope that this year's foreign aid bill will include a provision supporting rehabilitation services in addition to the traditional Artsakh demining efforts. So that's one area, humanitarian aid to Artsakh. Second, an increase in the U.S. aid package to Armenia. President Trump is coming in with some dramatically lower numbers for Armenia. Obviously, we reject that. The Congress needs to step up and see that aid increase with a special focus on assistance that facilitates the growth of trade and investment. We believe in the aid to trade transition, but U.S. assistance can play a bridging function, taking us from aid to trade in a sustainable way, and also U.S. assistance for military cooperation. And that's everything from field hospitals to peacekeeping training to capacity building. There's really, I think, there's tremendous room for growth in the U.S.-Armenian military relationship, and some of that depends on Congress appropriating the funds to make that progress possible. And last aid point, again, should be a no-brainer to anybody, which is that Azerbaijan does not deserve and does not need U.S. military assistance. This is an oil-rich, corrupt nation with a dictator that has just used his country as an ATM machine, stealing billions of dollars. And here we are as Americans, with our own financial challenges, subsidizing his military in the millions of dollars. We don't need to do that. That's counterproductive. It's ineffective, and it sends the wrong signals to Azerbaijan. We should not provide that military with one penny, one bullet, one gun, one of anything, as long as they are threatening a war against Artsakh and Armenia. In the wake of April 2016 and the terrible attack that Azerbaijan launched, there should be no tolerance for any U.S. military assistance to Azerbaijan. So that's a fourth outcome on the issue of foreign aid. So we've covered the bilateral outcomes, the Artsakh outcomes, the foreign aid outcomes, and I'll wrap up here with the genocide issue, which is obviously a major security issue going forward for the entire Armenian nation. And we would like to see this relationship contribute to America making a clean break with Ankara's complicity in the denial of the Armenian genocide. America needs to send the message to Erdogan and the Turkish government that you may wish to continue this toxic denial of the truth, but we will be no part of it. We break with that. We honestly remember what happened, and even more, we're putting America on the side of a truthful, just, and comprehensive resolution of this crime. So it's simply not a matter of, one president uttering one word. It is about a policy of America leading the way, pushing the international community toward a just, truthful, and comprehensive resolution of the Armenian genocide. A stronger U.S. Armenian relationship, we feel, will contribute to that, and as I said, many other areas as well. I just want to once again say how pleased we are that we have the parliamentary delegation here in Washington, D.C. It's great to see our brothers and sisters from the homeland in Washington engaging with their counterparts in the Armenian caucus and across the U.S. House and Senate. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful week. We look forward to many more developments in the coming days. I'll be sure to check in again at the first opportunity. And until then, please stay in touch on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and everywhere else. Thank you very much.